Everyone, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Matt Rataiczak. I am an NX CAD application engineer here at Prolim PLM. And today we're going to be talking about NX layers. Moving into our agenda for today, we're going to talk about what layers are for those of you who aren't familiar with the concept. And then we're going to talk about why you should use them and the benefits of using them and what kind of they can provide to you or your company. Then we're going to talk about the different commands that are involved around layers. We'll go into each individually and talk about the functionality each provide. And then I'll talk about templates and how you can set up your templates for use with layers. Now, starting off, what are layers? So layers provide a way to organize and manage the visibility and selectability of objects in your part. What this means is layers act as a sort of kind of container that you can store all this different information in about the different data within your file, such as your sketches, your solid bodies, your surfaces, your construction geometry, and you can organize those into layers to control the visibility. So say, for instance, there's some construction geometry that I have that I don't want actually shown in my model view. I can actually throw that onto a separate layer and then set that layer to invisible to control the visibility of that construction geometry so I don't have to actually see it in the model to keep everything nice and clean and organized. Now, why would you use them? It's pretty self-explanatory in that same what I just spoke about in keeping the model clean. It makes it easier to work around your model. You don't have a lot of geometry floating around that gets in the way when you're trying to work on your part. It makes it very easy to work around and keep the model clean and easy to use. It also allows you to set certain layers to visible only so that you can't even select them. So say, for instance, you had some bodies in there that you aren't going to be using for anything, but you want them visible in the background of the model. You can have those set to visible only and set on a visible only layer so that they can't be selected and help with selecting different models. Now, layer standards at your company. So this is something I like to talk about. Every company will have their own, if you're using layers, they'll likely have their own standards. NX has its own standards out of the box, but you may have, this may be different for your company. So like the layers that are used for specific types of geometry or objects within your model may vary depending on the company you work for. Like for instance, you might use layer 1 for solids, whereas another company might use layer 51 for solids. Well, 51 through 70, but usually I use like a increment group. So 1 to 21 is solids, or 21 to 41 is sketches, for instance. So understanding the standards at your company provide a way for you to maintain consistency across your users. So having those standards, you know that at your company, everyone should be putting your solids on layer 1. So you know layer 1 will have all those solids on it. You don't have to go digging, turning on all your layers to find all the solids and verify that they're all on the correct layer. So those provide that kind of consistency. And you can customize all of this within your template files. Now the commands are going to be going through. I'm just going to briefly go through each one of them. We'll go through layer settings, and this is kind of like the bread and butter of layers within NX. You use this to view layers. You use this to control whether you have it set to visible, invisible. It lets you see how many objects are on layers. It lets you even find what layer an object exists on by selecting it within the command, and it'll tell you what layer that object exists on. Move to layer exists to allow you to move objects between layers. So I could select an object, move to layer, and move that to a different layer. And then the work layer dropdown is a quick little tool that you can use to change your work layer. So you can do this within layer settings as well. But if I needed to say I'm going to making some sketching, I'm going to make some control points or something like that. I can swap my work layer to the associated layer that I'm supposed to have that on, so that it'll be placed when I create that geometry, automatically placed on that layer. Now, everybody has their own preferences on how they do this. Some people prefer to have create the objects on the layer that they plan on having it on. So, for instance, you change it to work layer 1 when you're creating an extrusion for a solid. So others may just throw everything on one layer. Work layer 1 is a common example. They just throw everything on layer 1. And then once they're done with the model, they might clean it up after the fact. Go in, do selection filters, select all their sketches. select all their curves, and then move all those to a specific layer. It just depends on your preference. Again, your company might have specific standards on how they want you to proceed with this, but most of the time you can kind of choose how you want to place it as long as you're doing it consistently and putting everything on the right layer. Now that's the commands that exist on the ribbon bar. Moving on, we're going to talk about the ones in the pull-down menu. So again, we have access to the layer settings, same command as the ribbon bar. We have a command called layer visible in view. And this is a nice little command that lets you control visibility of specific layers within a specific model view or a drawing view. So for instance, if I wanted some of that construction geometry in my background that I don't want to show in the model view, I can then hide that so that that layer that exists on in that model view, so when I'm in my trimetric model view or my custom model view, it won't be shown. And that can carry forward to your drawing views. When you carry a drawing view in to your draft file, you can choose whether or not that layer is shown in that drawing view. So you can hide different geometry inside of a draft view. Then we have layer categories. So this is what I was talking about with the different ranges of layers for your solids, your sketches, your curves, and so on and so forth. This is where you can create those. So you can create, for instance, I think the out of the box is solids, curves, datums, sketches, and surfaces are the 5 categories. You can create a custom one called construction, where you can change which layer or what layers exist for each of those to fit whatever you would prefer. So that's where you can control those kinds of options. Move to layer, again, same as the command on the ribbon bar. And then we have copy to layer, which is the same thing as move to layer, but instead of moving it, you're copying it. Now, moving into the live demonstration, I'm going to be showing you how you can use these layer settings inside of your actual models. So, like I said before, I'm going to go through each of the individual commands in a demo setting to kind of introduce you to all of them. So the main command we're going to be working with at first is going to be this layer settings. Now, all of these layer commands exist under the View tab, under the layer group in your ribbon bar. Now, inside layer settings, from top to bottom, there's a bunch of different features within this command. So in the dialog at the top, we have the option to find layer from object. What this allows us to do is to go in and select an object in space. And when we select it, it highlights the layer that that object exists on. So you can use this to figure out what layer an object exists on or resides. You also have the ability to change the work layer within this dialog box. So right here, if I wanted to change my work layer to 10, and enter, I'll go ahead and change my work layer to that 10. You can even see that change up here in my ribbon bar on the work layer. If I wanted to change it back, I can also just come into my list of layers down here and just double click on a layer, and it'll automatically change that to my work layer. In the layers section of the dialog, we have our list of layers available to us, and along with some display options on how we want to show those. So for instance, right now I have category display turned on so that each of the different categories, the out-of-the-box categories, are shown, along with a custom one here, this construction category that I created myself. Now, you might notice there's only one layer here, and I can't expand any of these other groups, these other categories. So where are my other layers at? It's because of the show option down here. So if I change this to all layers, you can then see that I have all these other layers here. So how I want to display my layers, whether or not I want to show all layers, layers that I have objects currently residing on, all selectable layers, or all visible layers. And I'll get more into these last two here in a second. Now, say for instance I wanted to look at my layers not in this category display, I can uncheck it up here, and then you can see a full list of all the layers that exist within the model. There is a total of 256 layers inside of your models within an X. Now, if I go ahead and turn category display back on, I want to go ahead and check all on, and then switch back to not category display, and you can see it checks on all those different layers. Now, for all selectable layers and all visible layers, what these do is they allow me to specify whether, or kind of filter out layers in my model. So say for instance I have layers specifically defined that I don't want shown. There's something, maybe there's some sketches or some datum points that I have placed out in space for a spline curve that I don't care to see because it just makes the screen all busy. What I could do is then I could come in and select a layer and hide that layer. So say that I threw them all on layer 6 for whatever reason. And then I don't want to see that layer listed inside of my layers list. I can check all visible layers, and you can see layer 6 disappears from that list. So I have the ability to control that. It's just another way to filter out those things. And the same thing goes for all selectable, except in this case, it's whether or not you have this visible only check. So if I have 7 set to visible only, I come in and set all selectable layers, 7 will then disappear. Pretty straightforward stuff. It's just an easy way to filter out your layers and control what you can see in the model. Now, beneath that, we have our add category. This is how you can add those additional categories. So for instance, this construction one I have here, I just want to add another one. It's called custom. You can see I can add categories as needed. And I can throw different layers into each of these categories from my category control options that I'll show here in a minute, or within this dialog as well. Now, we also have layer control options. Now, these are a little bit self-explanatory in that we've already shown these, but these are just specific buttons for those different features I talked about before. So for instance, if I take layer 63, I have the ability to make them my work layer, which I could do by right-clicking or double-clicking on it, make visible only, which I could do by checking this box here, or make invisible, which I can do by unchecking this box. So these are options that already exist within that I've already shown, but these are buttons that you can use to use those same kind of features. Moving on to move to layer. So this is going to be your number one tool for moving objects between layers. So currently inside of this model, all of my objects exist on layer 1. So what if I wanted to try and organize that a bit? So for instance, with this class selection, I can now go in and select the different objects I want to move. So first off, I'm going to go ahead and set my selection filter to sketch. And I'm just going to do a big wide group select and grab all those sketches. When I hit confirm, it'll then prompt me for a layer I want to place it on. I'm just going to select my sketch category and hit OK. Now, if I come back into my layer settings, turn off category display, layers with objects, you can see it threw 25 objects onto layer 21, which is the first layer of the sketch category. So it moved all those objects for me. So I can kind of organize after the fact. And this comes back to how you prefer to control your layers and control how your data is organized. Whether you want to change your work layer as you create things, whether or not I wanted to say, make it work layer 21, then go in and create my sketch, or if I prefer to just make everything and then move it after the fact. That's up to you and or the standards of your company, what you choose to do. Typically myself, I prefer to just build everything and then move it around after the fact before I save out and send out the model. But it might vary depending on your company and what your company wants you to do. But those options are available to you. Also within move to layer, like I showed before, I use the selection filter here. There is a select all button here. So if I would just say select sketch and then hit select all, it would still carry through with that selection filter. And I can invert my selection as well. So your typical class selection tools exist within this command bar. You also have filters that you can use. This is just typical class selection stuff. But if you ever wanted to, instead of using your selection filter up here, you can come into type filter and pick those types from here as well. So that's move to layer. Like I mentioned before, you have your work layer here. So this is if I wanted to say change my work layer to 21, I can change it that way. Just another way to change your work layer. We also have layer category. So this is where you can control where layers exist within a category. So for instance, my construction layer, I can come in and edit it. And I can choose what layers exist within that category. So if I were to change layers 251 through 256, just shift click here and add. You can see it marks it as included, so they're included within that category. It's really all there is to it. It's just your way of controlling those. So for instance, if you as a company wanted to go in and change the out-of-the-box layers, you can go into your template files and change these so that in the future, whenever a new file is created and pulls from that template, it'll have those layers specified the way that you want them. Whether they're the out-of-box categories or new categories you've created yourself, or just changes to the out-of-the-box categories, however you would want to set those up. And there's also copy to layer listed here as well. So again, this is just move to layer, but it's the copy feature. It's the copy version of it. So if I wanted to copy objects into other layers, I could do that through the same class selection filter. Go in, select a sketch or a curve or a solid body, and then pick a layer I want to copy it to, and hit OK. So that's all there is to that. Now within my menu bar, there are some other tools that we can use. So if I come down into my format, there are some, again, there's our layer settings, our layer category, move to and copy to layer. But there's this other command called layer visible in view. And this is a neat little feature. And what this allows us to do is it allows us to choose what layers are visible within a specific view of my NX model. So currently, we're in the front model view. It's my work view. If I go ahead and hit OK, you can see all the different layers that are currently visible. Now, remember, I put the sketch on layer 21. So let's say I wanted to hide that sketch. I can come into layer 21, make that invisible, and hit OK. Notice how the sketch hides. If I do show hide and hit show all, notice how it doesn't show that sketch. So this is also good to know for the future if you ever go into a model that you didn't design or another engineer, you might be getting it from another company or a vendor, and you try to show all the geometry in a model or all the features in a model, and stuff isn't coming up that you're expecting to. Like, where's the sketch for this model? There's another place you can hide those, and that's within your layers. So it's worth going into your layer settings and making sure you turned on all the layers in each of your individual views. Now, something that people miss a lot of times with this is if I swap to my isometric view and swap back to my front, you might notice that that sketch is still there. So what can happen, I don't want to mess up my default too much, but if I come into my layer visible in view again, go ahead and make that layer 21 invisible, hit OK. What I need to do now is right-click and save the changes I made to that view. So you can see that it's no longer showing that sketch. I go into isometric and then back into front. That view is that sketch is now hidden. And again, you can create custom model views. So if you don't want to mess with your isometric, your front, bottom, back views, you can then come into model views and create add a view and just name one custom. So then you can use that custom view and make changes as you need, right? So that's another cool feature. And this can also be brought into your draft file, which I'll show here in a sec. But so if I say wanted to hide a specific solid body in a drawing view on a model, so say for instance there's some background geometry inside of an assembly that I want to hide from a specific view for a better cross section or something along those lines, you can then go into that specific model view, hide that layer that body exists on. So my solids are layers 1 through 20, I believe, if I remember correctly. And I could throw that solid body on layer 3, for instance, hide that layer, and then make that layer, or hide that layer on that view. Then when I go into my modeling view, that model or that piece of geometry will no longer be shown in that model view in my draft file. So you can use it in that manner as well. So there's a lot of cool functionality with layers that often gets overlooked that you can kind of play with and do some really interesting things with. Now I'm going to show you how you can use those custom views for, say, for instance, your draft file. So we already have our sketch here moved to layer 21. Now let's go ahead and go through the process of what it would look like if I was trying to hide a solid body from a specific view, and how that would carry over to my draft. So, and like I showed before with my custom view, I'm going to go ahead and go into my layer visible in view and hide layer 21. Notice the sketch will disappear. I'll go ahead and save my view to make sure it recognizes that change I just made. And then I'm going to move a solid body to that layer. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and select a solid body. Let's grab this green body here and move it to my layer 21. Notice how it then hides that layer. Go ahead and save my view again, just to make sure it's saving these changes as I make them. Now, when I go back to my drafting side, or my drafting application, go ahead and specify a template. I don't really care about sheet size or anything. And then it prompts me to create a base view. I'm going to set this to my custom view. And you can see that it does not have that green body shown in that view. However, if I were to create another base view using a different view, a model view, it'll carry over that green crossbody. So this is how you can carry forward those kinds of settings and options into your draft file to kind of control what you want shown in specific views. And it's a nice feature to have access to.